Hey there, good evening. I'm really glad that you're here watching this tonight or day. I'm recording at night. It's the easiest time for me. I appreciate you for being here, and I'm going to tell you part 2 of my story tonight. I started with part 1 of being raised FLDS in my experience, because each individual's differs quite a bit. So, I'll just do a little recap of kind of where we were at before. And my family had just moved to my grandfather's house. They had told us that my grandmother Colleen and my grandmother Diana, those were the names of the mothers that we were told to go, to be placed under, I guess is the best way I can think of to say it. And then a few months later, my mother moved in with the rest of my grandfather's family in his house, so we were all under one roof. Even though my sister and I didn't get to stay down with my mom, we were made to stay up with the other girls in the household. And that was mostly just because they believe very strictly to keep boys and girls separated, and then partially because the bishop had told my mother that that we didn't belong to her anymore. And that's still a painful thought for me to think, because I can't imagine the pain that my mother has been through and still goes through with everything that has happened. It's really tough to understand why somebody wouldn't just go with their kids in a situation like that. Like, why wouldn't you just leave? Why wouldn't you leave with your husband? Why wouldn't you leave and take your kids and get out of there? But my mother was also born and raised there. I'm 4th generation, I believe, and she was 3rd generation. So born and raised her whole life. And she had a very, very strong testimony of their beliefs, and still does. So it's very, very difficult for her to go through believing that if she doesn't do these things, she's going to go to hell. She's going to lose her salvation. She's going to lose any chance of her kids' salvation. She'll basically have just screwed her whole family's afterlife if she doesn't do what these people say. That's the fear that she lives in. And so that's why I can, I forgive her. I don't really hold anything against my mom for where she's at right now, because I was a lot more rebellious than my mother. So thank God. Oh, I can't even imagine what it would be like to still be there. It'd be horrible. So when all this stuff happened, I just kind of went into a state of disbelief and numbness. It was easier to shut my emotions off after a while. It just got too much. And so I used a lot of sarcasm, and I just tried to make my days as fun as possible, which at my age was go find my friends. And we liked to go for walks and just talk about life as we knew it and listen to our music. After my father was sent away, then that's sort of where my rebellion began. My father was somebody that I really, really looked up to and took what he said very seriously. And so not having him there just I didn't see the point in trying to be a good girl. Also because he was sent away for absolutely nothing. And years later, the only thing I could dig up was that he was kicked out for seeing angels, and they said he was seeing demons. He confessed that, and they told him he was seeing demons and that he needed to go get it right with God and repent from afar. The reality was that my father was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And so when he did see things, to him, it was very real. And in their very closed minded mentality, anything mental is the devil. You must be possessed with an evil spirit. The Lord must be punishing you. The list goes on. And so he went out dealing with that and not having his children or his wife in his life anymore. We were very, very watched. When we would do phone calls with him, they would stand right outside the door or send my grandmother in to make sure that we weren't planning on sneaking to see him or anything like that. And I hated those days. Oh man. Oh, so many memories. I wrote my father's number on my hand, and because my grandmother had watched me, she made me go wash it off and made sure I got all of it off before she would let me go. And I held that against her for a long time. I had a lot of anger towards her, and towards my mom when I was a teenager. So she did the best she could. She really did. And I ended up liking my grandfather's house all right. It got a little better as far as the bullying from other kids around the house, and we started to make friends. And I remember cutting my long johns. I don't know if you guys are familiar with long underwear, but long underwear to an FLDS is your sacred garment that is gonna just protect you from everything, I guess. Know that Mormons wear garments after they've gone through the temple, and it's a similar thing to that, but it's a little different because it's a little based off of the very old Mormon teachings mixed with whatever other weird shit they come up with. And so the underwear we had to wear was made out of, sorry, I have to keep looking down at my notes. Last time I didn't make notes and it was a bad idea. So anyway, I hated my long underwear. It was itchy and thick and hot. So my grandma was trying to make me continue to wear it because I would take it off, and they found out because when I would go to get myself fitted for a new dress or something, if like if I got told, okay, unzip your dress or whatever to get your measurements, like exact waist measurements and stuff like that, then you would be in long underwear and a long slip. And I didn't have mine on. So my grandmother knew pretty quick that I wasn't wearing my long underwear. And it was a very big deal. My grandmother would check my sleeve. She would say, show me your sleeve. Show me your sleeve. And so I'd have to pull it out of my sleeve and show her that, yes, I'm wearing my long johns. So we didn't call them long johns. We called them underwear, long underwear. And so I started hacking my sleeves off 3/4 length. And then I would just wear from my wrist to my elbow with my long johns, so that when she asked me to show her my long johns, I would be like, here they are. And that worked. That worked for a while until I can't remember how I got caught, but I got caught somehow doing that. And then they decided that to be more thorough. So when my grandmother or my grandfather would give me a hug, they would just like feel my shoulder and kind of pinch my clothing to see if they could feel the next layer of fabric, which would be the long underwear. And then if they couldn't, then they would take privileges for me. I would be stuck at the house doing chores or whatever, mostly just helping the other mothers who ran the house cleaning, the garden keeping, and all that. And so then that was what I did if I didn't get privileges. I was there 3 years, and in my last year and a half there, I really, really, really wanted to leave. And part of this stems from what happened to me after we had moved there. So we had finally been getting used to living there, getting used to life the way it was there. And they were letting us visit our dad every few months. It wasn't very often, it was very rare. And in between this time, my dad had, well, I'll tell that story a different time because that's a whole nother story. But anyway, not getting off point. We had a chance to visit my dad. And they told my sisters, we're taking your brothers down to see your father. Do you want to go? And we both said no. By then, there was enough parental alienation to make us decide that we didn't want to go see our dad, because there were so many rumors flying around. Oh, he's a creep. Oh, he did this. Oh, he was drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes or something. There was all kinds of rumors. There was a girl that was like claiming he was a creep to her. And it was just speculation. It was just rude, catty rumor mill, small town rumor mill crap. Anyway, my sister and I didn't go. And that's something that I regretted for the rest of my life, because that was the last chance that I was given to see my father. He was not doing very well in the last year and a half or two that I was living with my grandfather. Wait, I'm off on my time. I'm sorry. He actually passed just a few months, 6 to 8 months in to living at my grandfather's. He passed away. He committed suicide, and he had gone off of his medication and stopped seeing his therapist, as is common with mental illnesses. Someone could feel like they're doing really well and think they can handle it without this now, and sometimes that's not the case, and wasn't the case for him. So he ended up driving his car off a cliff, and I know why he did it. He had had everything stripped from him. Everything that mattered to him was taken from him, and he was told that he didn't get to have them, and that he was a bad person, and that he needed to go repent. And it got to him too much. Just going through those lows alone, I cannot imagine how depressing that was for him. And so I can understand 100% why he would feel like he had nothing in that moment. He couldn't see past that moment. They found my father at the bottom of the ravine 5 days after. It was August of 2006. And so the heat had completely destroyed his body. The casket was closed because he was unrecognizable. The car had fallen on top of him because he'd fallen out of the car first. And I don't know why I'm telling you this, but that is what happened. And just for those rumor spreaders, there was no drugs or alcohol in his system. No drugs or alcohol found. Because my dad wasn't a drinker and my dad didn't do drugs. He was a good man. He was a really good dad. We were told we didn't get to go to his funeral. When they told us that he had passed earlier that day, I had just eaten lunch and I was in the restroom. I hear my name being called and they say, "Come downstairs. Everybody needs to come to the living room right now. It's an emergency. Father has something to tell us." My grandfather. And so I went with my aunts and uncles, who were all around my age and younger, down to the living room. And before I had left the bathroom, I thought to myself, great, now they're going to just tell me my dad is dead. And that was kind of like, I think I just at that point just was like, okay, what next? And when we got down there, he told us, my grandfather told us that he had passed, and I couldn't cry. It was really weird. It felt unreal. I felt like I was being lied to. I felt like it was going to end. I was going to wake up and it was just going to be a bad dream, and that he would show up. And I wish that was true every day. But anyway, we didn't get to go to the funeral because the bishop, Lyle Jeffs, told my mother, "Don't worry about it because you don't belong to him anymore." And that just sticks in my head. There's a special place in hell for you, Lyle. I hope you know that. You are a real piece of shit. And anyway, where were we? Got off there a little bit. I got a little mad. He told us we couldn't go to the funeral. And that made me so angry. I felt so helpless. I wasn't even quite 15. And I couldn't drive. There was no way for me to sneak. I didn't know anybody who would take me down, because any of my family that had left, I was alienated from them and told that they were bad and, rank apostates. I should never associate with them. And so I didn't know them at all, nor where they lived or anything like that. But I knew I wanted to leave. I had known that ever since they sent my dad away. I just didn't know how. And then after that, after my dad passed, then I really started to think about how am I going to do this? How am I going to get out of here? When I started to think about ways I could leave, I started thinking about ways that I could rebel more outwardly to do something that would be like, oh, you're so sinful, you have to be sent away. Before my dad died, my goal was that I was going to leave and go find him. After he died, it was just, I want to get out of here. I hate this place. I hate everyone who's in charge of me, except for counting my mom and my grandmother Colleen and the people who were there for me, my friends. So I started to sneak out. I had friends, I had guy friends who had a little more freedom than I did. So they got to work out of town, they got to work and kind of see the world a lot more than a lot of us girls. And so when they came home from their jobs, then I would hang out. And I had a boyfriend at the time that I would just chat with. It was just like a very innocent, go for a walk, talk about life, kiss, and and yeah. So I started sneaking out to go be with my boyfriend, and then from there we started to go and hang out at his friends' houses at parties and stuff that were going on. And I started to see the world more, and it just made me want to leave more. I just wanted to feel normal because I knew I stuck out like a sore thumb, and anybody from several miles away knew who I was in that dress, knew where I was from at least. And I hated that. So I just raised hell with my grandparents and my mom until they knew I had a phone. They had taken away my first couple of phones, or three. But every time they'd take it away, I would just go buy another one. And they couldn't keep that from me. So I finally stopped hiding that I had one. And I just said, this is my phone. And if you take it from me, I'm just going to sneak back down to St. George and buy another one. And so they didn't take it from me. They just got my number by that point because there was no use. My grandfather and my grandmother realized that it wasn't going to work. We had also all kinds of worldly music. I'm talking Avril Lavigne, Backstreet Boys, Simple Plan, Bowling for Soup. Oh, just so immoral, right? Oh, and so I had a whole collection of that, kind of mostly that style of music, a few others. And that got taken from me. And I was so mad. I remember being so angry. But I had burned them all onto my computer. So I just made more copies. And so I would just make my copies every time my collection got caught. Listening to worldly music and hanging out with boys was not enough for them to decide that I could leave. Every time I would talk about it, that I wanted to, it would just turn into hours and hours of gaslighting and just telling me how I'm just throwing away my salvation and I'm just throwing it away for a temporary desire and all this stuff. And so to this day, when someone's just preaching me a sermon, I clock out. It's going in one ear and out the other. And so I decided that, like I would go down, and I decided the first attempt I tried to leave, that I would just go down and stay with my boyfriend at the time in his little tiny room, which was actually a utility room with a bed in it. There was a water heater and studs, and he just had a bed, a twin bed. And I was like, oh, well, just come live with you. He's probably sitting there like, uh-huh, yeah, no, you won't. But anyway, I was just had this big plan. And so I left. I had him come pick me up and take me to Hurricane. But my grandfather and my grandmother got wind that I was leaving. So my grandfather drove down to Hurricane and picked me up and told me I wasn't going because I wasn't 18. At this time, I was 16. And so I had to get back in the car with him and go back. And the whole way home, hours, well, as long as that drive took, it felt like hours, like a 20-minute drive. And then, to go home and have some more sermoning done and, figure out something to keep me busy so that I wouldn't go do things like that. So they had me working at the health food store that my grandfather owned, or just some other community project, or helping my aunts or something. But it still didn't stop me from sneaking out at night. It was just something I did until the day I left. And so the reason that I was kicked out was because I fornicated. Who knew it would be so easy to leave a cult? I wasn't held captive physically, mentally, yeah, for sure. Emotional and mental abuse are staples of the FLDS. That's how they kept us there when we didn't know better. And using those fear tactics, of course. That you're going to hell, your children's blood will be on your skirts for eternity. That was something Lyle just loved to say to people. And so when they found out, I guess somebody had seen us and told the bishop that's what had happened. My grandfather came in the next day and woke me up out of my bed, which I was very tired because I had been out all night, and said, "Where were you last night?" And I said, "I'm in my bed. I was in my bed." He says, "No, you weren't. Where were you?" And I says, "In my bed. I was asleep." He says, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Where were you at 3 o'clock this morning?" And I said, "I was in my bed." And he said, "No, you're not. You," well, he said, having, yeah, freaking YouTube weird censorship crap. But you get it. "You were with so-and-so." And he just kind of bursted it out there. Like, kind of yelled it because he was just appalled that I would be doing that. I was 17 when this happened. So off we go to the bishop to see him and face the crimes that we had done. So we get to the bishop's office. The person that I had been with was there too with his father. And they had sat us down, asked us if we loved each other. We're like, "I don't know. Yeah, I guess." It was more of a yeah question mark. What is that? I mean, what does that even mean? He's cool. But anyway, they really pressured us to get married. They says this is the only way to make it right. You need to go get married and go out and live your life. And if you want to come back, you can write letters of repentance every week and send them into jail at Warren Jeffs and send them into the bishop. And the bishop had told myself and the person that I was with at that time that if we ever wanted to come back, then it would be a very rocky road for us, and to stay away from the rotten apples. That's what he called the apostates. And so we immediately left and went and found some rotten apples. Turns out they weren't rotten. Turns out we left the rotten apples behind. And so that was just the beginning of my life outside of the FLDS. And it was super exciting. It was super exhilarating. And I really did feel like I had a second chance at life. I felt like, wow, like it was just, for the longest time, I didn't even know that being in the religion I was from was actually a cult. I didn't even think this was a cult. In fact, I did write letters. And I wrote letters because I wanted to see my family. I didn't necessarily want to go back to the religion. They had just stopped letting our families see us and talk to us as much, little by little. And the only way to talk to them would be to try to repent, is what they wanted us to believe. So they would make it very difficult for us to come and stay. There was only one time after I left that I was actually able to stay at my grandfather's home overnight, and it was simply because I was a new mom. And I got to stay one night, and it was really bittersweet. After that, I didn't get to go stay there anymore, and they just got weirder and weirder about talking to me. And I kept thinking that if I just wrote my letters, then I would be able to get back and at least be in my family's lives and theirs and mine. Because now I had a son. 6 months after I was married, I found out I was pregnant with my first child. And I was really excited because my whole life I always wanted to be a mom. I grew up just being taught that that was the highest calling a woman can do, is bring children into the world and be a good mother to them and raise them right. And so I was super excited when I found out I was going to have my first child. And I didn't see myself as a kid, and now I look at 17-year-old kids and I can't believe that that was me. I was married and had a baby on the way, and wow. And also, finding jobs was super difficult for me. I didn't know how to write a resume, like, at all. It was so hard. I applied at about 26 different places in Las Vegas. Coffee shops, restaurants, gas stations, everywhere, just trying to get a call. And during that time, at the end of 2008, just after the crash, nobody was hiring anyone, not to mention a person with no resume or hardly any work history at all. Barely even filling out the job application right. Because I didn't have to fill job applications out before, and no one taught me. But then I moved to Arizona after living in Vegas for a couple of months. It wasn't long. Moved to Arizona, got pregnant with my first baby there, and he was born in 2010. 2010, I think a lot of revelations were coming out that were getting a little weirder, to my knowledge. Just random little things like, give this one for example, even though I don't know the exact date when the revelation was given to pedo bro. But they said no onions. Like, for some reason, onions were bad. 2011 rolled around, and I started hearing of baptisms being redone. Like, everyone had to have their baptisms redone. And I thought that was super, super weird. It just brought all sorts of questions to my mind. Like, why do they think they need to rebaptize everyone? Like, everyone's tainted somehow now, is what they were acting like. And, it was just another step in the control. So from outside looking in, for me, it was just like, come on, you guys, how can you not see this is off? Like, even though at that time I still didn't understand, I still thought I was going to hell for leaving. And 2012 rolled around. I was pregnant with my second child, my daughter. And then they sent out my grandfather and his wives. And the children that were still at home, there was just 4 or 5 still there, were sent to live with other family members in the community or relatives or whatever. And my mom was sent to live with her brother. And my grandfather and his wives were sent out of the town and told they couldn't come back. The reason for that was that they were accused of murdering unborn children, which in freaking pedo bros terms pretty much means that if you had a miscarriage, you were a child murderer, or if you let a male doctor touch you, you were tainted and you were like wicked or something, I guess. And then they started to. Oh, my grandfather. Just lost my train of thought for a second because I'm way past my notes by now, if you can't tell. But so my grandfather and my grandmother moved away from there. I was able to get in touch with my grandmother. She never completely stopped talking to me, but there was a point in time where she would only text. And she was more of a rebel herself. She's actually where I got a lot of my rebel attitude from. It was from my grandmother Colleen. And aside from being raised in a cult, she was an incredible person. I think the cult did things to all of us that, well, taught us things, conditioned us to believe in certain ways that most of us aren't proud of anymore. But she moved to St. George with her sister wives, and my grandfather moved to Flagstaff, Arizona. He, I guess, felt like he needed to be away from them, or he was told that he couldn't be with them. I'm not sure which. But when the church interviewed every one of his daughters to ask them if they had ever been touched inappropriately or anything like that, because one of the cards that Warren played was blaming people in the community for exactly what he was doing. Narcissism 101. Like, he would accuse these men of doing these things and make up some reason why, when it was what he was doing was actually doing it. So there was that. My grandmother contacted me and we got to meet up, and I was so happy to see her. Every time I got to see her and bring my kids and go hang out with her and have lunch, and she took me to her house and showed me all of her plants and told me their names. And she was actually really sad. She was very, very broken because her whole life had changed and she didn't know any other way. And after that, I saw her cling to hope that she would be able to go home for a couple of years. And when that didn't happen, her health was already declining somewhat. But there was a surgery that she had, and she never fully recovered from it. And after that, it kind of seemed like she lost the will to live. I felt like I was just trying to grasp for any part of her that would wake up and realize that that's not all life has to offer. I had a lot of good conversations with her, and she never cut me off, even when I told her I didn't believe in Warren Jeffs. She passed away in 2021. She had an infection in her bones. I think it was sepsis related due to her surgery never having completely healed and complications from those types of things. But before she died, just 1 week before, she came out to Colorado City and she told her son that she was glad that he got his father's house back, and told one of her other sons that she was proud of him for starting a business. And she knew right there at the very end. I think that she just couldn't accept that her whole life was based on all of that. It's too much for her. But it made me happy that she, in the end, saw everything for what it really was and believed the truth. And she planted some incredible seeds for the people that are still in that were close to her, because she told her children that she didn't want anyone to feel excluded from her funeral and that everyone was to feel welcome and loved by her. And her funeral was a very, very hard thing for me to be at. I'll just leave it at that. So I get too emotional when I talk about her. When I write my book, I'll go into lots more detail. She really was one of the most incredible people in my childhood, and she's so much of my inspiration for who I am today. I just realized that I've been rambling off for almost 45 minutes now. So I'm going to let you guys get back to bed or your day. I'm going to go to my bed because it's 2 a.m. my time. You sleep, right? I do. Okay. So, if you guys have any questions about what it was like, or any questions at all, just put them in the comments, because I really would. I'm curious to answer people's questions. I like answering people's questions because what I'm explaining about here is like this. The experience was like this. So, if that gives you an idea, then you'll just have to be patient with me as I unravel all of this and remaster it. I'm gonna probably remake these as time goes on, but this is my start, so hey, we're here. And I started and I'm doing it. So, you guys have a good night.